Hello, hello! Today I will be bringing you another lower tier guide, this time featuring the Königsberg. I decided to pick this game as an example because, well, first of all, we are classically against T6s. These days you're pretty much up-tiered every time you play a T5 ship. I strongly dislike the current matchmaking because it's ruined two of my favorite tiers, the T5 and the T6. But there are still ways you can basically grind past this, and I decided to take my beautiful pink Königsberg to give you an example of how to do it. Now, first of all, the Königsberg has, well, not recently, but it's been buffed so that the turrets can shift to both sides of the ship, and this has led people to play it surprisingly aggressive all of a sudden, which is something you absolutely cannot do in the Königsberg. You could do it somewhat well when you were matched up against T4, T5, but when you get up tiered like you do these days, the armor on the Königsberg scales extremely badly against higher tiers. It's just, I mean, it already struggled to tank anything at T5, but when you get thrown up against T6s, let alone T7s, the armor just can't deal with it at all. So I'm going to show you something that I rarely do, but something that you're kind of forced to do when you get up tiered like this, and that is just how defensive you kind of need to play this ship in order to actually make it work. Now, the first thing you notice on this map, by the way, is you notice the absolutely ridiculous spawns. We spawned with 4 ships up there and 8 of our ships down south. So obviously I sailed straight down south. Pushing into the cap to challenge their ships, I mean having to challenge stuff like Budioni, Nuremberg, no, it was Nuremberg, Königsberg, Budioni and so forth, but like something like a Budioni just straight up destroys you. It's not even an even fight, Königsberg versus Budioni. Budioni's armor just wrecks you, whereas his AP will also wreck you. Like, you can't do damage to him and he can just wreck you. So abandon that fight, and you might notice that I tried to pick something to shoot at in between the caps. And in general, I'm playing just very, very safe and careful. That's kind of what you have to do. A lot of people are struggling with being up tiered as of late. When they're up tiered as T5 or T6, they're up tiered to tier 7 or up tiered to tier 8 or even just T6. They're struggling with it because they are being far too aggressive in what they're doing. If you're the top tier, there's no issue with you being the aggressive guy. But if you're the lowest tier, you simply cannot be the aggressive player unless you're basically going for some sort of YOLO torpedo run or something like that. But in general, being the aggressive player when you're the lowest tier is just so difficult because you have too many disadvantages against you, and these are not player skill based disadvantages, but these are just ship based disadvantages. In my case, if I wanted to charge in and fight something like a Cleveland, like it would be just so easy for him to load AP and melt me, whereas his angled armor could absolutely negate all my AP and so forth. It's just not worth it. So I'm playing extremely safe. You notice, by the way, that I parked my ship so that I'm in line of sight from both the Cleveland and New Mexico and New York that could have actually spotted me, and I'm far enough away from the Königsberg that I actually don't get detected even when I'm firing at the Cleveland. I'm basically abusing the low caliber that I have to my advantage. This is where being low tiered is actually a good thing, because the low caliber and low detection allows me to stay undetected while taking fights. There are other advantages usually to being low tiered, and that's usually that your ship engine is actually quite a lot more responsive than it is for other ships. For example, attempting to push backward and forward in something like a York can be very hard, or like hide behind a cliff and then peek out and shoot and so forth. Can be very tricky in a York, or even a Hipper. It will be very sluggish and slow. But in a Königsberg, you actually do it quite easily. And I'm going to show you how I'm basically going to abuse this engine advantage and just abuse the terrain to my advantage. Now here I'm picking a fight with the Farragut. I have of course my Hydro active, so I don't get torqued by anything surprising, and he's managed to glide out of his own smoke. I glided a bit too far, but I'm full stopping. You see, this Nuremberg next to me, he's charging out. I don't want to do that, because I don't want to take these fights. I load HE, Even though you can shoot AP at stuff like New Mexico, I load HE because it's full HP, in which case there's no damage saturation, which means HE will have the potential to deal a lot of damage, and of course there's the fires, which against the higher tier battleship is universally very, very strong. There's a reason why HE is, or HE spammers in general, deal much better with being up tiered, and that's because fires deal percentage damage, and it doesn't matter what tier you are, fires will always deal a consistent amount of damage. You might notice that I glanced at the New Mexican he repaired, so I shot a few volleys at the Bayern, and now I switch back to the New Mexico because he has repaired my fires. Being aware of the repair times of other ships is very important. In this case, New Mexico is a US battleship, so he has a 20-second repair, which is very long. But on the flip side, he also needs a lot of time to reload that repair. So that means I know that any fires that I set on him now will be absolutely unrepairable. So of course, I just spam HE at him. And at this range, I'm hitting so many shells. You see, I'm hitting like 7 shells per volley, that there's a very, very high chance of actually starting a fire. So I managed to get 3 fires on him. Now I just ignore him, and I go back to harassing the Bayern. There's AP and HE, my AP and HE damage on him was actually very, very pitiful. I don't know if you guys noticed, but it was like 200 something. It's because my shells are such low caliber that it's unlikely I will do any damage at all. So I just got my fires and I switched target to maximize my damage and efficiency. Because spamming more HE on him now, it would be such a waste of time because my fires will do more damage than I possibly ever can. So I switch to AP and I shoot for the New York. You might notice that I'm actually not shooting for the bottom of his hull or the waterline where the citadel is, and I'm not shooting above him either. I'm shooting basically right between them so that my shells land kinda on the deck and on the superstructure, and that's where you get those juicy penetrations, which is how you can actually use AP against battleships in the Königsberg. And as you can see, well, I'm getting a few bounces, a few misses and so forth, but in general I'm dealing a pretty consistent amount of damage. It doesn't look like much, but when you realize with my rate of fire it's constant damage, and it's steadily chipping him down. And of course at the same time I've had my fires on the New Mexico burning him down as well, so you realize I'm getting damage from 2 different sources right now. And once again I'm constantly using this, what I talked about, moving back and forth between this island. You might notice that I'm often detected even by planes here. But when you're this close to battleships and you're covered behind an island like this, they can't actually really see you that well. They don't really have vision of you. They can only see you if they have a spotter plane. And even then shooting at you from this range as they have, their arcs are so flat that it's likely that they will hit the island. In the meantime, you can see I'm reversing, moving back and forth. See if I could actually secure this New Mexico kill for myself. Would be a nice bonus XP. Nope, someone stole it, of course. I'm not even surprised. Yeah, back to harassing the New York with my AP. You say I get spotted, unspotted, spotted. Randomly when planes are around I get spotted. But in general, just moving back and forth like this as I'm doing, and I'm using the terrain, makes me not a very attractive target to go for. Especially since we have these battleships that are pushing out, and these guys who are showing themselves. I have a König behind me who's pushing out and so forth. This is, by the way, why I didn't want to go fight the Budyonny. That was pretty much what, full broadside AP, and he bounced, straight up bounced 2 of my shells, or didn't even bounce, they just non-penetrated. So Budyonny just has such a huge advantage. Königsberg is pushing out though. You see this Königsberg has been very aggressive. Of course he's lost all his HP doing so, and right now he's charging right into my ambush pretty much. Another thing, of course, that needs to be discussed about the Königsberg is, while the AP arcs and rate of fire on it is fantastic, and is of course the firing angles, and in general everything about the ship is quite nice except for the incredibly paper thin armor. I mean, it's very, very easy to citadel the ship, very easy to punish it for any sort of mistakes, and but the torpedoes are actually absolutely top tier. You can launch 6 torps per side. It has 2x free launchers on both sides, and you deal a massive amount of damage with this. You can pretty much one-shot any battleship with this, or well, very close to one-shot. Of course, if you end up against something like a Nagata or something, you're gonna struggle. But in general, these torpedoes are fantastically strong. Another thing is, of course, I'm actually reversing and showing myself to the guys on my left because I'm worried about this König actually charging out. You see the difference between being behind the island and not being behind the island. Even though I was detected multiple times, you'll see the difference now. I'm instantly going to start getting shot at because now I'm no longer behind the island. It's strange how huge of a difference this small visual cover makes to people wanting to shoot you versus not wanting to shoot me. Launch some torps that way in case they try to charge me down. Keep reversing in case this König wants to come out. Now, what I was about to say was the torpedo angles on the König are actually absolutely top tier. Top tier. You can see I can almost launch torps straight backwards, and that's straight up fantastic. They're some of the best angles in the game, in my opinion. At least for T5, they're just amazing. And this Königsberg, I'm pretty sure he's gonna spot my torps. Yeah, it looks. I think he spotted them because he started turning hard right. So he's probably gonna dodge them. Barely, is he? Yeah, he barely dodges them by turning hard right. But still, that stopped him from rushing me or doing any sort of shenanigans. And he had to show broadside to a lot of ships down south. So, in general, pretty good deal for me. Oh, another thing to point out, of course, is when you're shooting German battleships, you want to aim for kind of the same spot I was showing. This applies to a lot of other ships than just the Königsberg. You want to aim for the same spot I was talking about, where you don't want to aim for the waterline, and you don't want to aim for the side hull, which is very, very strong and heavily armored. You want to aim for that line right where the side of their hull ends and the superstructure starts. You see where my crosshair is? That's kind of where you want to aim, but at this angle, of course, it's very hard for me to actually get penetrations. But maybe I'll be able to show it to you closer up. Now, this is what I was talking about, the firing angles, both backwards and forwards, they're excellent. Now, you never want to, when you're charging a battleship in the Königsberg, you never actually want to chase straight at him, because then you expose your weak bow armor, which is actually quite easy to penetrate. But you want to keep yourself slightly angled, so he basically has to bounce the shells off your, or we can bounce the shells off your hull instead of letting him shoot straight into your nose. Because if you can shoot straight into your nose, then he can pin and citadel you straight from the front. But you saw the angle I have there? It's kind of hard for him to actually get citadels from that angle. I mean, he can do it, but it's significantly more challenging for him to do it with that angle than it is for him if you're giving him the straight nose-on approach. So I never recommend going full nose-on, because that makes you quite easy to hit. And torps on my left side are recharging. Actually, they're pretty much, well, you can see that my right side torps are already recharged. My left side are just 15 seconds away. And let's see if I can hit that sweet spot. That was kind of, you saw where the shells landed, they penetrated. That's the sweet spot you want to hit. It's not that easy to hit it, but if you can land shells on that sweet spot, that's when you get full penetrations on battleships, even if they're higher tier, German battleships, that is. That was kinda, you saw one shell went through to that gap. It's a small gap you have to hit, but if you hit above, you tend to get pens. If you get below, then you just get non-pens. Yeah, but you can see that ridiculous amount of torps you can fire. Just an absolutely ridiculous amount of torps. And when they land, they do massive damage. And with the great angles, you never have to actually expose full broadside, and it's quite easy to do what I did there. Basically that snake-like maneuver when you first shoot your left side, then you turn slightly and you shoot your right side. And he's got 12 torps he's got to dodge, which is tricky when you're trying to kill the guy rushing you at the same time. And because he has to turn, he can't give his full broadside. And Königsberg that's rushing you and manages to get close is actually quite tricky to deal with, unless he gives you bow on, where you can just straight up citadel him. Now 138k damage. Considering I was against T6s, I consider this quite respectable for a cruiser. And well, Ognevoy, of course, DD got capped top spot because he sailed around capping. Capping XP will always be king, but still, you can do well in the Königsberg, but you just have to tone down the aggression a lot and wait until the late game before you start getting aggressive, because if you charge in at the start, you're way too juicy of a target and everyone will just instantly delete you off the map, and that's simply not worth it. Right, as usual, I will start with the modules. I consider the most important module to get first is the range upgrade, because having the default range at 15 is honestly quite stifling, especially when you get up tiered. Having to get that close to high tier enemy ships can be frustrating. The hull upgrade is, well, it's quite good. Your AA is never going to be that impressive. I mean, it gives you small buffs overall, but your AA is never going to be that impressive, and you don't have defensive AA anyway, so it's not really that important. It doesn't affect your main artillery at all. It gives you a bit of rudder shift, but in general, not that big of a deal. Get it second after the range. Consumable wise, I always recommend a premium repair for the reduced 30-second cooldown. Upgrade wise, main armaments gives you main battery and torpedo survivability. Aiming systems reduces your dispersion and your torpedo tube traverse speed. And finally, damage control system 1, because I don't really find myself losing engine or steering that often. Captain perks wise, basics of survivability, expert marksman, vigilance. As usual, I prefer vigilance instead of superintendent, because I don't like being that vulnerable when Hydra is on cooldown. Superintendent is of course an option, but then you have to plan all your attacks based on Hydro. And finally, Demolition Expert as my 4th perk. In the past I used to take AFT on German cruisers, but with the buff to HE on high tiers I get DE, and of course buffing that 8% chance to 11 is quite nice even at lower tiers, especially when you get up tier. Anyway, that was my short Königsberg commentary. I hope you enjoyed it.